Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So today I attended a colloquium, and I'm really not interested in going into details or naming names. Actually, all of the speakers were fantastic and really were sharing interesting content, so I'm not really interested in talking about the content. But I have noticed in recent years, as I am reading more academic writing, that academic writing has become more and more opaque. And there were two speakers in particular that caught my attention today. The first was a young assistant professor. He was probably in his early 30s. And I had the greatest difficulty understanding his talk. Even when it came to the Q&A, I couldn't really understand what he was saying. And I was asking my colleagues, and they weren't understanding what he was saying either. And then there was an older professor who was much more established, and although he was talking about similar material, they were all discussing narrative and particularly experimental writing, I understood everything he was saying. I understood his talk, I understood the responses he gave to the questions that were asked. I felt this huge disconnect, however, toward the younger professor's talk. And I wanted to talk about this today because I am currently writing a paper, not for a journal, but for one of my courses. And I'm always trying to improve my writing, of course, and to be precise in my writing, but also I am often very intimidated by Academese, and I wonder whether I should employ it or not. And to be honest, I find it sometimes very frustrating, particularly writers who do scholarship about social justice issues. So I'm thinking particularly about Judith Butler, whose work is on gender theory. Her writing is notoriously opaque. Let me read you a passage from one of her writings. Now, there was this bad writing contest that occurred between 1996 and 1998. And in 1998, Judith Butler got the award for bad writing. And I will read you the passage. I will link below all of the websites that I refer to. But this comes from a scholarly journal, Diacritics, in her article, Further Reflections on the Conversations of Our Time. So here's the passage. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of structure and marked a shift from a form of Althusserian theory that takes structural totalities as theoretical objects to one in which the insights into the contingent possibility of structure inaugurate a renewed conception of hegemony as bound up with the contingent sites and strategies of the rearticulation of power. I don't know about you, but that is probably the most opaque, dense, convoluted sentence I have ever encountered in literature. Maybe Derrida, I don't know, Derrida seems pretty close. Reading him in French is equally terrifying. But it particularly disturbs me when it comes to someone like Judith Butler, because her work is on historically marginalized groups. And not only that, but I have this impression that she has a Marxist philosophy, and Marxism is intrinsically about trying to raise up the worker, those who are not elites, those who are underprivileged, those who are perhaps less educated, those who are in quote-unquote unskilled labor, that these are the people whom we're trying to address here, who we want to give voice to. And yet her writing is utterly inaccessible. I mean, to even me, who, is doing a PhD, and I've read quite a lot of philosophy, I can't understand this. And this is what bothers me so much about Academese, is that this perhaps is seen as very intellectual, brilliant writing, precisely because it is inaccessible. But if we're trying to do work on social justice, if we're trying to talk about hidden narratives and minority groups that tend to be less privileged, right? They are minority groups precisely because they're less privileged. How is this helpful? What is the point of using such elitist language to talk about something that is non-elitist? If we're trying to give voice to those who don't have the privileges that we do, which include education, why write scholarship like this? I mean, who's going to read it? And if Marshall McLuhan is right, that the medium is the message, what message is this medium communicating? It seems to me that Judith Butler is telling us that only a certain kind of intellectual need apply. Everybody else doesn't matter. A few years ago, I was doing a project for a summer at the University of Michigan. I've mentioned this before. And one of the students in the program, along with me, was working with a sociology professor who was studying the working class in Camden, New Jersey. And Camden is one of the poorest cities in the United States. It's like Detroit. It used to be an industrial powerhouse, and then because of globalization, these jobs went overseas, and so the people living there are impoverished. I mean, they don't have jobs, and they're very bitter. And the sociology professor who was conducting the study was interested in seeing how the people living in Camden really thought about globalization and what globalization means to them. One of the women had this just brilliant response. She said something along the lines of, why did you ask this question? You knew damn well that we don't know what globalization is. And yet, you ask these questions just so that you can make us look like a fool, to make yourself feel better. And that's what the study seems to suggest to me. You know, why ask these people what this means? It doesn't make sense. It's like we deliberately use inaccessible language and then wonder why people don't care about what scholars do. I'm not a fan of the Academese today. It really bothers me that we write in ways that are inaccessible to the vast majority of even intellectuals, let alone the vast majority of the population. And if we're talking about something like gender and sexuality, then you would think that scholars would want to make as widespread as possible, right? To talk about this stuff and to share it and so that my mom can understand it. What's the point? What's the point of writing like Judith Butler? Like, what is she trying to accomplish? It is frustrating to me because I feel this great push to write like this, but I can't understand it, and I don't want to write like this. I don't want to write in such a way that people are made to feel stupid, made to feel that I must be a genius because I can write these opaque sentences. We're using language that only 0.01% of the population understands. The two speakers today, I think, were equally intelligent, equally capable. I'd like to think that, their scholarship was equally good, but I just wish that younger assistant professor had spoken in a way that I could understand. I wanted to be able to understand what he was saying, and it just came off as incredibly pretentious. I feel this great pressure to write in this similar manner, and I don't want to. And at a time when the humanities are not receiving federal support for their work, I think we need to think about how we present our work, and if we're writing in such a way that no one can understand what we're saying, then what are we doing? How is our work helpful? How is it bettering society? In what ways? So yeah, these have been my thoughts. I just came back somewhat frustrated by what I experienced today at the colloquium. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.